I can't believe this entire thing was a Romeo and Juliet rehash. And look, we started on the very last page that the plan is called 2A, or not to be shifted off this mortal coil, how dare I. Nevertheless, Stella Maris, the companion piece to The Passenger, and if you haven't watched our review, I will leave it down below, but I think you should watch that one first. This is purely dialogue. There is no he said, she said, bullshit. And I felt like a Limp Biscuit after reading this. If you think this duology decides to wrap everything up in a nice bow, that is just not the case. There are still many questions left unanswered. What we do know in regards to the Alyssa Alice conundrum is that originally she was born with the name Alice. The reason that the generic names used within science paper are Bob and Alice, and her father thought it was a little quirky in-joke, and therefore Alice decides to change her name to Alyssa to separate, to distance herself from that. We also learned that the Sweet Home Alabama undertones aren't as strong as we previously thought. In fact, the love that Bobby depicts for Alyssa within The Passenger is mutual. However, Bobby didn't want to consummate their love. Is Stella Maris a flashback? I think that's up for debate, which really muddies the water of what I thought The Passenger was. Stella Maris is set in the 1970s, and we learn that Alyssa comes to Stella Maris Institute for the Mentally Unwell because she had to make a difficult choice, which is to turn off Bobby's life support. As I mentioned in The Passenger, Bobby was a Formula driver, an F2 driver, and we learned that he's currently in a coma. Alyssa has been advised to turn off the machine because Bobby doesn't seem to have a chance in hell of recovering. And that's the reason why I say it muddies the waters for this, because I'm not entirely sure now if The Passenger is all in Bobby's head while he's in a coma and he's in this state of life and death, and in some way he is the passenger, and therefore arguably everything that happens in The Passenger is Bobby's mind still working in this coma, which might explain some of the looseness in time, and also something I didn't mention in my review, because I knew that you would come back to watch Stella Maris, is how Bobby meets the kid at the end. The kid, which I previously mentioned within The Passenger review, is the hallucination of Alyssa, and within Stella Maris there's the idea that these horts, these cohorts within her mind are possibly being sent to her. For what reason, just like this duology, Cormac McCarthy doesn't really give us. But the kid would only come to Bobby if he is in this state of limbo between life and death, which would make sense if he's in the coma. It would make sense because Alyssa wants to end her life. She's in the limbo of deciding when the right moment is going to be. And we know in The Passenger that she does kill herself, which begs the question, did she actually kill herself, or has Bobby just thought that she's killed herself? I'm very confused. Equally, and I'm fully aware that I'm talking about The Passenger more so than I am Stella Maris. But remember, this is the companion piece, so they are in tandem with each other. Alyssa, at the start of Stella Maris, tells the second Dr. Cohen that there is a letter that she is to deliver. She shouldn't have read it, but she did decide to read it, and that letter is mentioned within The Passenger. It's the letter that Debbie read and broke down crying to, and it's the same emotional response that Alyssa has. But what the contents of the letter is, we're not given the absolute foggiest, but Cormac McCarthy pushes you into the idea that it has something to do with Bobby telling Alyssa that their love must live. Not that it must die, and not that it must end, that it must live. I'm aware that I'm manipulating the semantics here, but live the love does. Within Bobby and within Alyssa, it continues to flourish, but it can't go anywhere. There's no end point, and there's not really any start point. In fact, this is, and everything about Bobby and Alyssa is just as Alyssa talks about gluons, that they are the roads between quarks. In fact, it's the car crash that has created these two stories. It is what has allowed Alyssa to decide to take her own life, and it's allowed Bobby, if he is alive in this one, who knows, the impact for all of these questions to come forth. The conversations between Alyssa and the psychiatrist are very similar to what we see in The Passenger between Alyssa and the kid. They both start out standoffish, but allows Alyssa to open up and to talk about her own philosophies in life. life. More so in Stella Maris is that the case, and sometimes it can feel like Cormac McCarthy is just waxing lyrical on his ideas of morality, of life, of death. To reiterate, the science is always seen as giving the answers where art doesn't seem to provide anything. Cormac McCarthy seems to be suggesting that he sees that both are equally relevant and are equally weighted in terms of what they can provide us with answers. Stella Maris is not as strong as The Passenger, but nevertheless, I will say, knowing that this is going to arguably be Cormac McCarthy's swan song, quite literally going to be the last ever published words of Cormac McCarthy, is... it's quite touching. It's quite touching. While Stella Maris really is the journey to why Alyssa will ultimately take her life, and therefore the subject matter is quite heavy, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it is quite depressing. But there's equal amounts dwelling and coping as there is hope and joviality going throughout Stella Maris, and actually in The Passenger there is a hubbub of emotions that ripples through this. And while Alyssa knows that she wants to take her life, she knows that she wants to die, she knows that everything will come to an end, and at some point she'll be nothing. But Alyssa wants that nothingness to happen straight away. But Cormac McCarthy says you can't really plan a death. As I'm discussing this, I'm aware that I sound that this is quite a somber book. I don't think it is. I think it's humbling. McCarthy is trying to articulate this, but again, throughout Stella Maris, he talks about language being a parasite, that it almost eats into the human condition, that his want to articulate, his want to express almost defeats the point, because there's no way to articulate it, there's no way to theorize it. And this is mirrored with Alyssa decided to stop her study and focus into topology because she does not know the shape of things to come. For what I think a companion piece to do, which is to enrich the first, it definitely does that. I say this because I really think that you need to read The Passenger first. I didn't hate my time with Stella Maris, I didn't really enjoy myself, even though I read it in a very short space of time. I'd give it like a 4 out of 10. I'm not enthralled.